But I did have a father who worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And when I was growing up, he worked on kidnapping and extortion cases and read spies at the United Nations, the Cold War. So I knew from a very early age that there was good and evil in the world, that there were criminals out there, that people did bad things. And so I think that somehow inspired me influenced me to get into crime writing. But what I always wanted to do came as a result, I think, of the Kennedy assassination. I was in 4th grade in November of 1963, practicing for the Christmas play when the one of the nuns came into the auditorium and told us all that we had to pray for the president because they told us he was sick. And we went back to our classrooms and then were let home for the night. And by the time we got home, we heard that the president had died. So that weekend, like most Americans, I watched those 4 days of television. And from that time forward, I knew that I wanted to work in television news. That's all I ever really wanted to do. So I went to the University of Rhode Island, where I majored in a double major in journalism and political science, and there should have been a triple major in fun, and had a great time there. And when I graduated from college, I got my first job at CBS News in New York City as a desk assistant, working the 4 to midnight shift, and the holidays and the weekends, and making $117 a week, which wasn't even a lot of money back in 1976. But I loved my job at CBS News, and I loved it because every day you went in and you didn't know what your assignment would be. It never got boring. There was always something new happening. You always were learning something new, something that you never would have bothered to learn about had you not been assigned to work on the story. And I worked there until just 5 years ago. So I've written 15 books, and the first 10 of them, I was still at CBS News while I wrote them. But while I was working on Dying for Mercy, one morning I was watching the Today Show, and Martha Stewart was doing a segment on her new book called Wedding Cakes. And I was fascinated. What she had done was take different wedding locations and design wedding cakes to match the location. So for example, for a beach wedding, she would do a cake like this, you know, with festooned with sand dollars and seashells and seahorses. Or if the wedding took place in Vermont in an open field, she might have the wedding cake covered with sugar maple leaves. The little 2 or 3 minute segment on the Today Show was so fascinating that I turned off the TV and I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought the $75 coffee table book of the wedding cake book, of her wedding cakes. I wasn't getting married, no one I knew was getting married, but I was just fascinated with this book. And as I went through with it, I just wondered, you know, why is it that I was so into the subject? And I think, as I thought about it, I realized that most people I know are interested in weddings. Even if they're jaded, even if they've been through a divorce themselves, even, you know, if they think these big weddings are a waste of money, whatever, they're still interested in the details. And I think that it's because we like the idea of two people being willing to commit to one another and wanting to spend their lives together, and we're rooting for them. So I started to think of, how about if I had mysteries around a wedding, but some kind of murder and mayhem happens in the middle that the bride and groom have to everything has to be solved before they can live happily ever after. So that was the beginning that was where the idea came from. And I needed to come up with a main character, and I came up with Piper Donovan, who's a young actress, and she's based on my daughter Elizabeth, who's an actress, who's been out in California for 3 years. And I realize and say to Elizabeth all the time, honey, you have to have something else to do in between roles, because it's a long time between roles. And because otherwise you'll go crazy just waiting to get the role and putting up with all of the putting yourself out there and the rejection when you don't get the part. You have to have something else creative to do. And she hasn't taken my advice yet, but I thought I could write about a character who did. So I took Elizabeth and made up Piper, an actress who isn't getting a lot of work, but she decides to come home and help her mother in between roles, working at the bakery and making wedding cakes. So the first wedding cake mystery was To Have and to Kill. It takes place in December in New York City at Christmas time. And my hope is to do 12 Piper Donovan wedding cake mysteries all together, each in a different month in Piper's 27th year of life. So December is, and in each month it'll be at a place in the United States that would be a really good place to have a wedding in that month. And which brings us to Footprints in the Sand. But in this one, Piper goes to Sarasota, Florida, to her cousin's wedding to make the cake, and Piper is also the maid of honor. Sarasota's sand is quartz-based, so it's white and it's powdery. It never gets hot, and it's very it's like sugar. And we have a huge turtle nesting, sea turtle population in the season, as so much of Florida does. But that whole story of the sea turtles, it slays me. I mean, it's just so interesting how the mother pulls herself up onto the beach in the middle of the night and all by herself digs out the nest, lays her 120 eggs, and then lumbers back into the ocean. 2 months later, if the nest isn't washed out by a wave or a storm, the little turtles hatch. They have to get back to the Gulf, and hopefully they're not eaten by raccoons or big birds or something on the beach waiting for them. And if they get into the Gulf of Mexico, they're so tiny they can get eaten by whatever's in there bigger than them, and everything is bigger than them. And then it takes 20 years for them to mature and be able to have their own babies. And meantime, they travel around the oceans of the world, going as far as Africa sometimes. And when it's time for them to nest, they go all the way back and find the beach that they were born on and lay their own eggs. So I just think that is so fascinating and almost unbelievable. And that whole nature, the wonders of nature kind of thing, that I wanted to use that in Footprints in the Sand, and that's how the bride and groom come to meet one another, through the sea nesting. They're volunteers with the sea nesting program. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it, and I hope you'll enjoy the books. Thanks.